Guam, August 1944. The scorching sun spills over the wet sand, and the air is thick with the scent of salt and smoke. Just this morning, cicadas were singing here. Now only the clang of metal can be heard. Somewhere up the slope, American troops are finishing off the remnants of the Japanese garrison. Aiko Sato, a 25-year-old nurse of the Imperial Army, sits against the wall of a half-ruined warehouse. Her hands are covered in blood. Not her own, someone else's. She's bandaging the shoulder of a soldier who no longer speaks, only breathes quickly and shallowly. In the distance, the explosions grow less frequent. That means only one thing. The defense is over. In her bag, there are a few bandages left and a scrap of cotton. No water. The commander is dead. The radio is silent. Aiko presses her palms to the ground, cold and sticky. Around her, it's quiet. Too quiet. Even the sea seems to have stopped making noise. She remembers the last words of her instructor at the training school in Osaka. If the Americans take you prisoner, don't give them that satisfaction. Better to die. A woman without honor is no longer Japanese. Aiko had nodded then, convinced that war meant order and duty. Now, the order has crumbled, and only one duty remains: to survive. From behind the bushes comes the sound of footsteps. Heavy boots, the click of metal, rifles. Aiko closes her eyes, presses her palms to her chest. Her heart beats so loudly, it feels like it's betraying her. Someone speaks in English, sharp, quick words, but without rage. A shadow falls over her. Aiko opens her eyes. In front of her stands a tall American, young, wearing a helmet, his face dirty. He doesn't look like an executioner, but like someone exhausted by all of this. He notices the white armband on her sleeve, a red cross faded by blood and sun. "Stop. Nurse?" he asks. Aiko doesn't understand, but the word nurse is familiar. She nods almost mechanically. The soldier slowly removes a canteen from his belt and offers it to her. Aiko stares at it for a long time, not believing. Then she takes it. The water is cold, real, and when she takes a sip, tears stream down her face. Not from fear, but from confusion. Everything she was taught collapses in that moment. The Americans don't shout, don't strike. One of them calls to the others. They approach, carefully inspecting the wounded. One says, "Help her." And then, a strange sight. The enemy helping a nurse bandage a Japanese soldier. The sea begins to make noise again. Aiko doesn't yet know that this day will mark the beginning of another war. A quiet one, without weapons, but far more difficult. A war with everything she once believed in. Night in the prisoner camp on the island of Saipan smelled of damp earth and kerosene. Aiko sat on a wooden cot beneath a canvas tent, listening to the steady drip of water somewhere in the yard, rhythmic, like a pendulum. Every sound pulled her back to the past, to nights when the radio in Osaka broadcast the voice of a stern announcer. "Americans don't take prisoners. They will torture you, mock you, strip you of honor. A woman in their hands is no longer a woman." She believed it. They all did. Fear was a weapon, and it worked better than bullets. Now that fear was colliding with reality. The soft voice of an American nurse, the scent of soap, steam rising from a metal bowl of soup. Everything around her felt wrong. Even the sky was too bright. For the first time in many weeks, Aiko saw herself in a mirror. Cracked, cloudy, but still a mirror. Her face was gaunt, her skin yellowed, her eyes sunken. But in them appeared a strange glimmer. Not hope, no, something else. Distrust mixed with confusion. The Americans called her and the other women comfort patients, though they had been nurses, telephone operators, cooks. They hadn't fired weapons. But their uniforms, grey, stitched with the imperial flag, made them enemies. On the second day, they were assembled in the yard. A Marine captain, tall, with a sun-bleached insignia, spoke through a translator. "No one will harm you. You are prisoners, but you are human. Follow the rules, and you will be treated with dignity." Aiko didn't believe him. The words sounded like a trap. "You are human. Why say that if it's true?" But then something happened that cracked the wall of fear. The Americans buried the dead Japanese. They didn't burn them. They didn't throw them into a pit. They buried them, with prayer, with name markers. Aiko stood off to the side, watching a soldier in a dirty uniform carve a wooden cross and place it in the sand. "They were brave," he said quietly, not for an audience, just to himself. Tears welled in her eyes. No one was supposed to speak that way about enemies. But he did. That evening she ate her full portion of rice for the first time, leaving not a single grain. For the first time, she didn't wonder if the bowl held poison. Later, in the barracks, the women whispered, "It's a trick. They want us to let our guard down." "No," Aiko said, staring into the darkness. "They're just different." She didn't know what she meant, but she knew the words had escaped her because the old belief had already cracked, and the crack was growing. In July 1945, the camp on Saipan began to feel strangely orderly. Each day repeated like a line in a prayer. Wake up, roll call, work, lunch, report, sleep. Aiko dug garden beds alongside other captured women, growing green bean sprouts for the garrison. Sometimes when the wind blew in from the ocean, she could taste salt on her lips and imagined it was the scent of home. One afternoon after lunch, an American sergeant, a red-haired young man named Thomas, approached her holding an envelope. "From Japan," he said, carefully pronouncing each word. "Your family." Aiko froze. A letter? From Japan? That was impossible. Mail between enemies? But Thomas only nodded. The letter had been delivered through the Red Cross. He handed it to her gently, as if it was something fragile, and stepped away. The envelope was crumpled, one corner singed. The handwriting, her mother's. Aiko sat on the barracks doorstep, unfolding the thin paper. The words were uneven, the ink smudged, as if written by candlelight with a trembling hand. "Aiko, if you are alive, know that the city is no longer ours. After the bombing, everything burned. The school, the market, our home. I am alive. Father is not. I found his ring. Take care of yourself. Mother." She read the lines over and over until the letters blurred through her tears. The ashes of Osaka lay between the sentences, invisible but tangible. Later, in the shade of the palm trees, Aiko sat beside Thomas, who was cleaning his rifle. "Osaka, no more," she said in broken English. He looked up. "I know. We saw photos." "Why?" she asked, not accusing, just trying to understand. He didn't answer right away. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes and offered her one. "Because war," he said quietly. "Everyone loses." Those two words stuck in her mind. Everyone loses. Not enemies, not victors, everyone. That night, Aiko didn't sleep. Outside, the rain rustled softly, and the camp breathed steadily like a living creature. She looked at the letter, at her mother's careful characters, and thought, maybe I didn't fall into the hands of enemies, but into the hands of people who were simply tired of losing too. From that moment, she began to listen. Not to orders, not to propaganda, but to the voices around her. How the soldiers argued about baseball, how the cook whistled a jazz tune, how someone laughed, openly, not out of fear. Laughter was the most incomprehensible sound of war. It sounded like life returning. In August, the heat was so intense that the air above the camp shimmered, as if time itself were melting. Aiko, along with the other women, was hauling buckets of water from the well to the kitchen. On the way back, she heard a cry, short, sharp, nothing like the sounds of orders. Near the warehouse, one of the American soldiers lay on the ground, clutching his leg. Blood seeped through the torn fabric of his trousers. Several of the captured women recoiled, expecting a shout or a gunshot. Instinct forbade them from intervening. But Aiko hesitated only for a moment. She dropped her bucket and ran toward him. "Don't move," she said in broken English. "You bleed." The soldier, young and freckled, tried to joke. "You think?" But pain laced his voice. Aiko pulled a strip of cloth from her waistband, tore it, and applied a tourniquet. Her hands trembled, but her movements were confident. She had once studied first aid in a girls' school, before the war. The bleeding stopped. The soldier exhaled and looked at her in surprise. "You're nurse?" "No, teacher," she replied softly. "Before." He tried to say something else, but lost consciousness. A few minutes later, a medic arrived, followed by Thomas. He saw Aiko, her hands stained with blood, and shouted, "What happened?" The medic answered briefly, "She saved him. Quick thinking." Thomas turned to Aiko. There was no anger or suspicion in his face, only respect and something like bewilderment. "You helped him?" She nodded. "Enemy, friend, same blood," she said simply. That evening, as the sun sank into the ocean, Thomas came to her barrack. In his hands was a small package. "For you?" he said. Inside was a piece of chocolate, a rare treat in the camp, and a small pencil. "You can write back to Osaka." Aiko stared at the gift, unable to speak. The chocolate smelled like childhood, before the bombs, before the slogans, before the sky became the enemy. She looked up. "Why?" she asked. "Why you give me this?" Thomas shrugged. "Because you remembered what war tries to make us forget." That night, she didn't sleep. She wrote. The paper was a torn scrap from a notebook, but every word came from the heart. "Mama, I'm alive. There are not only enemies here, there are people." Outside, the camp once again felt peaceful, and for the first time since it all began, Aiko felt not freedom, not hope, but a delicate, almost imperceptible forgiveness. September brought storms and the scent of change. There were fewer shouts in the camp now. Orders were given more calmly, almost wearily. The war was ending, but no one yet understood what that truly meant. Aiko was transferred to a small infirmary within the camp. The American doctors had decided that her knowledge, however basic, could be useful. Her tasks were simple: sterilize instruments, change bandages, fetch water. But for her, it became something more. It was a time without flags, a place where there were no longer us and them. One day, she was assisting a doctor in stitching up a Marine who had been injured in an accident at the warehouse. The man, a brown-haired soldier with grey eyes, watched her movements. When she carefully handed him a bandage, he suddenly asked, "How long you been helping us?" "3 weeks," Aiko replied. "You're good," he said, surprised. "Better than some of my medics." Aiko gave a faint smile. "Because I listen," she said quietly. That evening, when the heat had finally eased, Thomas found her again near the kitchen. He was carrying 2 mugs of hot coffee, the first in many months. "Thought you'd like to try it," he said. "American coffee. Bitter as hell, but it keeps you awake." Aiko took the mug with both hands. "You always bring something," she said with a smile. "Habit," he shrugged. "I fix things. People, sometimes." They sat in silence. Smoke drifted over the camp from the fires where women were drying laundry. Somewhere a radio played, a faint, trembling signal carrying the voice of a broadcaster. "Emperor announces surrender." The words were in English, but the meaning struck instantly. Aiko froze. Her eyes filled with fear and disbelief. "Surrender. Japan." Thomas nodded. "It's over." She stared at the ground, her fingers trembling. "Over means what?" He was silent for a long time, then said, "It means you can go home." Home, a word that sounded like both a dream and a wound. Aiko didn't know where to return. Her city had burned. Her country had bowed to defeat. And here, among those she had been taught to hate, she had felt human for the first time. The next morning, part of the camp's guard was withdrawn. The barbed wire remained, but the doors were no longer locked. The women were allowed to walk to the shore, to look at the ocean. For the first time, without fear. Aiko stood on the sand, watching the sunset. Thomas approached and stopped beside her. "You'll leave soon," he said. "Maybe," she replied. "But part of me stays." "Which part?" "The one that learned, not all enemies are enemies." He smiled, but in his eyes was a quiet understanding. The war was over, but the memory would remain. And somewhere far beyond the horizon, the world was beginning to relearn how to be human. The morning was strangely quiet. The sky above the camp's bay was as clear as rice paper, and the wind stirred the flags on the masts, but without their former dignity. As if even the fabric had grown weary of war. Aiko woke before dawn. The other women were still asleep, curled up in their blankets. On the nightstand sat her mother's letter, neatly folded, and a cup with the cold remnants of yesterday's tea. Tomorrow she was to leave the camp. Her name appeared on the repatriation list, alongside dozens of others. A return to her homeland. Only the word home now felt too loud, almost foreign. She stepped outside. The ground beneath her bare feet was damp from the night's rain. Near the kitchen, Thomas was already standing. In his hands, a small kettle and 2 tin mugs. "Thought you'd come early," he said, pouring hot water. "You always know," she replied, sitting on a crate beside him. They drank in silence. Steam rose into the cold morning air, and in that simple ritual there was something almost sacred. "You'll go home tomorrow," Thomas said quietly. Aiko looked down at her tea. "Home? Maybe only word now." "You'll rebuild," he replied. "You're stronger than you think." She nodded. "And you?" "I'll go back to the farm. Help my father. Try not to think about all this." The wind rustled between them. "I want to say thank you," Aiko said. "For chocolate. For seeing me." Thomas smiled, but his eyes shimmered. "You saved a man's life. You saw us too. That's how it starts, isn't it?" She wanted to answer, but no words came. Only silence, filled with the sounds of the sea. Thomas stood, rummaged in his pocket, and pulled out a small wooden pendant. A smooth piece of bamboo, carved with the symbol of the sun. "Found it near the beach weeks ago," he said. "Thought you might want it." Aiko took the pendant, her fingers trembling. "Sun," she whispered. "In Japan, sun is life." "Then take a bit of it with you." When the sun rose above the camp gates, their shadows fell side by side. 2 figures, almost touching, but separated by a thin strip of light. She knew they would not meet again, but that was the point. Kindness doesn't require reunions. It simply remains in memory, like the taste of warm tea on a cold morning. Later, in the truck on the way to the port, Aiko held the pendant in her hand. Palm trees flashed by, ruined houses, soldiers with tired faces. She looked at them and thought, if war ever returns, I will tell them that once enemies gave us tea and allowed us to become human again. When the ship left the Philippine shore, Aiko heard the true sound of the sea for the first time in many months. Not the kind that accompanied explosions and shouted orders, but a quiet, living sound, as if the water itself were trying to comfort weary souls. The women stood on the deck, clutching bundles of clothing and the few belongings they had salvaged from the camp. Some cried, some stared at the sky, and some simply stood in silence, unable to believe that the journey home had truly begun. Aiko sat by the railing. In her hands was the same bamboo pendant carved with the symbol of the sun. Its surface had darkened from salt, but the symbol remained clear, a reminder that light could be carried with you, even when the sky was covered in clouds. Beside her sat Mieko, a young woman from Nagasaki. She held a photograph of her husband on her lap. "Do you think he's alive?" she asked softly. Aiko was silent for a long time. "I think we're alive. That's enough for now." The ship sailed for days, and each day the sea felt like an endless mirror stretched between the past and the future. On deck, the women sewed, dried laundry, and shared stories. Sometimes Aiko closed her eyes and remembered the camp. The smell of smoke, the faces, the glances, Thomas. All of it now felt like a dream, strangely warm amid the coldness of memory. When they arrived in Yokohama, the city greeted them with silence. Ruined streets stretched to the horizon. Only charred walls remained of the old neighborhoods. People walked quietly, not recognizing one another. Aiko walked down the road, holding the pendant. Her mother was waiting, gray-haired, thinner, but with eyes that still held something of the old Japan. They said nothing. They simply embraced. That night, with the moon hanging over the city, Aiko stepped outside. Fires burned in the distance. Voices drifted through the air. Someone reading letters, someone singing. She pulled a scrap of paper and a pencil from her pocket. She hadn't written in a long time, but now the words seemed to find their way on their own. "I met people who were called enemies. They gave me tea and life. If someone reads this years from now, let them know war can destroy cities, but it cannot destroy kindness." She folded the paper, placed it beside the pendant, and smiled, not with happiness, but with peace, like someone who had finally learned how to forgive. The next morning, a neighbor knocked on her door. "Aiko-san, we're gathering women to help the children. Lessons, food, a little warmth." Aiko nodded. "Yes," she said. "I know how to make tea. Let's start with that." And when the scent of brewing tea filled the ruined street, the city, for the first time in a long while, began to feel alive again. The sun rose over the sea, and its reflection in the windows echoed the carved symbol on her pendant, a sign that even after the longest darkness, light always returns. 10 years had passed. Yokohama had once again become a bustling port, filled with the scent of sea, fish, and hope. Where ruins once stood, new houses had risen. Children ran through the streets, and above the city there was no longer the smoke of war, only steam from kettles and white birds circling the rooftops. Iko lived in a small room above a shop. She taught at a local school, helping children learn to read and write. Sometimes, after lessons ended, she would open the drawer of her desk and take out an old notebook, the one that had survived the prison camp and the long journey home. Between its pages lay the bamboo pendant and the letter she had never sent. That evening she finally made up her mind. She sat by the window, brewed green tea, and began to write. Dear Thomas, if you are still somewhere on the farm, where the air smells of earth and rain, know that your pendant is still with me. I held it when I returned to the ruined city. I held it when I smiled at a child in my classroom for the first time. Sometimes I think it's not just a piece of wood, but a memory of a man who taught me to believe that even an enemy can be kind. She paused, inhaled the scent of tea, and smiled. You once said, we'll meet in another time. Perhaps that time has already come. We just won't recognize each other. Maybe your children play in the fields, and my students draw suns in their notebooks. And all of it, because one day someone didn't raise a weapon, but simply poured a cup of tea. When the letter was finished, Aiko didn't seal it. She folded the page carefully, placed it inside a bottle, and walked to the sea. The evening was quiet, the water clear, just like the day the ship had carried her home. She threw the bottle into the water and watched for a long time as the waves carried it away toward wherever Thomas might once have been. Nearby, children were playing. One boy ran up to her. Sensei, what were you doing? I sent a letter to a friend, she said. Will he answer? Aiko smiled. Sometimes the answer is simply life continuing. When the sun finally disappeared beyond the horizon, she returned home. There was still a little water left in her kettle, and before going to bed, she poured herself a cup. Steam rose slowly, gently, as if the spirit of the sea had returned to say, You did everything right. Aiko lifted the cup and quietly said, Thank you, Thomas, for the tea, for the life, for the light. England, 1960. The morning began with rain, fine, almost transparent, like breath over a cold cup. Thomas Harper stood on the Hampshire coast, where the wind smelled of salt and iron, watching his son Jamie try to build a castle out of wet sand. A veteran of the Pacific Campaign, now a history teacher, he lived quietly, like a man who had given everything to the sea and returned with only one burden: memory. He had once believed that time would heal everything. But time only softened pain, like fabric faded by the sun. Sometimes at night he still heard voices, not screams, no, but quiet murmurs, like the rustle of paper. And among them, one name always echoed, a name he feared to speak aloud: Aiko. Dad, look, Jamie shouted. The boy ran along the shore, holding something shiny in his hands. There, in the water, I found a bottle, with a letter. Thomas frowned. A letter in a bottle. A story from children's books. But Jamie insisted, and soon in his palms lay a piece of glass, smoothed by time, with a yellowed sheet of paper inside. Thomas carefully pried out the cork with a knife. The paper smelled of the sea, and something sweetly familiar. Perhaps rice paper. He unfolded the letter and began to read. Dear Thomas, if you are still somewhere on the farm, where the air smells of earth and rain, know that your pendant is still with me. The words blurred. He sat down right there on the cold sand, feeling the rush of blood in his ears. It was her handwriting, neat, like the breath of someone afraid to make a mistake. Dad? Jamie asked softly. Is it someone you knew? Thomas smiled, and in that smile was everything: pain, wonder, gratitude. Yes, son, someone who taught me how to be human. He read the letter to the end. Every line rang with truth, as if the sea wind itself had dictated it. When he finished, Thomas folded the paper carefully, tucked it into his pocket, and looked out at the horizon. There, where the waves broke against the shore, he thought, or did he truly see, that for a moment a face flickered in the water's reflection. Dark eyes, a calm smile. He didn't blink. He simply nodded. The sea answered with a gentle gust of wind, and the bottle, now empty, bobbed in the foam as if preparing for a new journey. Thomas took his son's hand. "Come on, Jamie. Time to go home." "And the letter?" "It arrived where it was meant to." On the walk back, he kept thinking about Aiko's words. Sometimes the answer is simply life continuing. From that day forward, every year on this same day, he brought 2 cups to the sea. One for himself, the other for the one who had once shown him that even in the hell of war, humanity could be preserved. And each time the tea began to steam, the wind seemed to whisper from afar, "Thank you for the light." Yokohama, 1987. The old shop by the port smelled of paper, sea, and time. Ika Morita, 36 years old, a literature teacher, held a letter framed in glass. It hung on the wall between yellowed photographs of sailors and faded flags. Beneath it was a plaque in English and Japanese. "Found on the Hampshire coast. A letter from a Japanese prisoner to a British soldier. The story is unknown, but as you can see, it arrived." Aika stood for a long time, unable to believe it. She knew that handwriting, sharp, precise, as if cut from paper. She had seen it thousands of times on old notebooks, scraps of recipes, school letters. Her mother, Aiko, had died when she was 12. She had never spoken of the war, as if that part of her life had been locked away. But sometimes when she brewed tea, she would gaze out the window and whisper a single word in English. Hampshire. Now everything was clear. The shopkeeper, an elderly Englishman, stepped closer. "You're from Japan, yes? You know, people sometimes come in and ask about this letter. They think it's just a romantic legend." Aika smiled faintly. "No, sir, it's not a legend. It's my mother's story." He blinked. "Your mother?" Aika nodded. "She worked in the camp as a translator. She said the English taught her not to be ashamed of kindness, and that kindness is a kind of strength." The man fell silent, gazing at the glass. "Your mother was lucky." "No," she replied. "They both were. They met in a world where no one believed in humanity." She asked to have the letter taken down. The paper, though faded, still held the scent of salt and traces of ink. In the margins, faintly, almost invisibly, someone had written with a trembling hand, "If someone finds this letter, let it remind them that humanity is not a nation, but a choice." Aika stepped outside, where the wind pulled in from the sea. In her hands, the letter. On her lips, a smile, like someone who had finally understood why the sea takes and then returns. That evening, she stood at the pier and cast a new bottle into the water. Inside, a short letter. "To Thomas Harper, my mother found peace with the world. I hope you did too." She closed her eyes, listening as the waves carried the bottle away. In those waves were voices, memory, the past, and in a strange way, peace. And somewhere far away, on a cold English shore, tea began to steam again in 2 cups.